Genesis 3:16. 3,000 years of Western culture reduced the pain of childbirth to a single sentence. In pain you shall bring forth children. It was not an observation, it was a prescription. Pain in childbirth was, for most of recorded Western history, theologically mandated. To seek relief from it was to argue with God. To offer relief from it was to interfere with divine punishment. The practical effect of this theological position was that for roughly 2,000 years, the most powerful institutions in European medicine actively resisted the development of pain relief in childbirth. Not because the pain could not be reduced. Herbs and tinctures that dulled sensation had been known for centuries. But because reducing it was considered, by authorities with real power over medical practice, to be the wrong thing to do. This is the history of what women did inside that framework. Not the history of passive suffering, the history of every tool, every herb, every workaround, every act of resistance, and every institutional battle that eventually produced the epidural that 70% of laboring women in American hospitals now receive. It is a longer history than most people think, and it starts, as many women's histories do, underground. The herbs were always there, before hospitals, before physicians attending childbirth, before the professionalization of obstetrics as a male-dominated field in the 18th century. In the era when childbirth was managed by midwives and the knowledge of how to manage it was passed between women, there existed a pharmacology of pain management that operated entirely outside official medicine. Ergot, derived from a fungus that grows on rye, could stimulate contractions and in carefully controlled doses reduce their duration. Reducing the total duration of labor reduced the total duration of pain. Black cohosh, blue cohosh, and a range of other plant preparations were used to manage labor, though their safety and effectiveness varied enormously with preparation and dose. Alcohol was used. Strong spirits were administered throughout labor in quantities that modern medicine would consider excessive, and that likely provided genuine numbing effect alongside the substantial risks of alcohol to the fetus. Opium was available. Laudanum, a tincture of opium dissolved in alcohol, was a general-purpose analgesic in the 18th and 19th centuries, available without prescription, used for a wide range of conditions. Midwives used it. Physicians used it. Women administered it to themselves. Its effects on the baby, respiratory depression in the newborn, were not understood until much later. The knowledge of these preparations existed. The problem was that it existed in a context where using it required either access to women who held the knowledge, or access to a physician sympathetic enough to provide it, and finding the latter required luck. The formal medical effort to address the pain of childbirth began in the 1840s, and it began with an argument. In 1847, James Young Simpson, a Scottish obstetrician, used chloroform to anesthetize a patient during labor. The patient reported the experience as entirely different from previous labors. She named her child anesthesia. The outcry from religious authorities was immediate. Ministers preached that anesthetic childbirth was an interference with the divine order, that the pain of childbirth was a punishment that women were meant to endure, and that removing it was theologically indefensible. Simpson fought back with the same text used against him. He argued that when God performed the first surgery, removing Adam's rib to create Eve, he put Adam into a deep sleep first. If divine surgery included anesthesia, divine design could presumably accommodate it for women in childbirth. The argument would not have been decisive on its own. What was decisive was Queen Victoria. In 1853, Queen Victoria used chloroform during the birth of her 8th child, Leopold. Her physician, John Snow, administered it. The Queen found it blessed and soothing. She requested it again for her 9th child in 1857. When the Queen of England publicly endorsed pain relief in childbirth, the theological objection became substantially harder to sustain. The medical establishment's adoption of anesthesia in obstetrics accelerated thereafter. Not universally, resistance continued in pockets of conservative practice, but the central, argument that pain relief in labor was against God's will lost its institutional authority. What replaced the theological objection was not a better approach to pain management. It was twilight sleep, the morphine and scopolamine combination that did not eliminate pain, but eliminated the memory of it, and which is its own history entirely. What came after twilight sleep was the epidural. Epidural anesthesia was developed through the early 20th century, with regional nerve blocks being explored for surgical applications from the 1880s onward. The application to obstetrics came slowly. By the 1950s and 60s, epidurals were available in some hospitals, but they required continuous physician presence and carried risks that made widespread adoption complicated. The epidural became the standard of care for labor pain management in the 1970s and 80s, after improved techniques made administration safer, and after women, having moved through the natural childbirth movement and then back toward medical pain management, created demand for an option that actually worked without the horror story of twilight sleep. Approximately 70% of laboring women in American hospitals now receive epidurals. That number is sometimes presented as a medical choice freely made. It is also the endpoint of a chain that runs from Genesis 3:16 through a Scottish obstetrician's argument with the church, through a queen who decided she wanted to be comfortable, through 50 years of a drug that erased memory instead of pain, to a catheter in the lower back that provides genuine, reliable, consciousness-preserving pain relief. That chain took approximately 3,000 years to complete. Women did not endure the pain of childbirth for millennia because they had decided to. They endured it because every institution with power over their bodies, the church, the medical profession, the legal system, the cultural norms that determined what was acceptable and what was not, had collectively decided that the pain was appropriate. Every woman who demanded something better was, at some level, arguing against a framework that had been built to tell her that her suffering was correct. Queen Victoria didn't end that argument, but she made it considerably harder to maintain. Subscribe if you want to keep following this. Every week, the history that was hiding in plain sight.